This video will feature spoilers from Alan Wake 1 and American Nightmare. This is the direct sequel to those games, so things from those games will be mentioned. So reward there will be spoilers. I will also talk about aspects from Control, but nothing spoiler related, since Control is related to this game as part of the Remedy shared universe. So no spoilers from Control, but there will be spoilers from Alan Wake 1 and American Nightmare in this. Alright then, you have been warned. Alan Wake 2 originally released in 2023 by Remedy Entertainment and published by Epic Games. And oh boy, there are some things around this game's reveal and stuff that's just questionable. Just stuff like how they didn't make a physical copy on console, saying, well, if we did and the physical copy would cost $70. And it's like, you're published by Epic Games. What? Some of the fact that because it's published by Epic Games, that means it also only PC-wise released on the Epic Game Store, not on any other platform, unlike the rest of the games they made. Alright? And on top of the fact that they put a lot of budget into this game, because information I see claims that both development and marketing budget reportedly was about 70 million euros, making it one of the most expensive cultural products from Finland. And while you can feel the budget they put into this project, you can also feel why this game didn't become profitable until this year, February of this year, being 2025. The main premise is that a titular character, Alan Wake, still trying to write a novel in order to get out of the dark place. But while he's doing that, in the real world, we play as Saga Anderson, an FBI agent sent to investigate a string of murders by a cult who seem to be following, for some reason, the books written by Alan Wake. But while doing investigation, she ends up coming across the Taken and the dark presence in the aspects now bleeding into reality again, with early on actually finding Alan Wake himself. That was easy. So why we play as Alan Wake in the Dark Place when we play as his sections then? Adding more to the mystery what's going on, as Alan talks to Saga, mentions how he feels like the dark presence is still around, and that's going to be a threat trying to affect reality, but Saga feels she needs to solve these important aspects with the cult by herself, while in the dark place, we are investigating the dark presence, and also trying to figure out aspects also from the cult, who are for some reason, like I mentioned earlier, following Alan Wake's novels as if they're some sort of guide or prophecy. So right off the bat, there is just a lot of stuff going on, with Saga quickly accepting the stuff that Alan mentioned with the Manuscript, but also having an aspect that because of the Manuscript, the world around Saga is now being altered, with people doing and saying things that makes no sense, or people have been claiming stuff about her own life that does not actually add up with reality, but it is the reality that everyone else follows, which is something Saga really wants to prevent, considering the stuff that Alan apparently has written about her family in her novel, which is also sort of frustration. Why did Alan write her family into the novel in order to try and escape the dark place? Something Alan doesn't remember. Meanwhile, when you play as Alan in the dark place, you're dealing with the dark place itself, trying to stop Alan, whether it be the Taken trying to stop him, or just how the world shifts, considering the dark place is making a replication of New York and around the area where Alan lives. And I like the fact that the environmental details in the dark place keep shifting and adding stuff just to mess with Alan by proxy to the player, and just the signs you can notice of it trying to smack talk him and stuff. Just aspects of environment when it comes to Alan's sections are really good, and I do like that. Although because Alan's alone, he doesn't really have any character to bounce his thoughts off of, so it's mostly Alan and his monologues they do the heavy lifting, since for the most part there's no one else in the dark place for Alan to really interact with. You also of course have the manuscripts, although a lot less this time around, at least a lot less that the player can pick up, because for the most part the manuscripts are way more major to the plot this time, with the characters really acknowledging them, seeing them as a way to figure out how to progress forward, with Saga even being on the lookout in order to see them as instructions what she needs to do next in order to try and solve this mystery. So the fact that the manuscripts have way more plot relevance with characters acknowledging them. And since the world around is shifting as well, I like the fact that Saga is also technically going against the manuscript when she keeps trying to remind people what her actual life and family is like, but people just think she's crazy and doesn't really want to accept what happened. So I like the fact that Saga is trying to, at points, go against the manuscript, something I wish characters did in the first 2 games to highlight the fact that you can't. There are of course plenty of side manuscripts a player can get, although it does irk me that in order to really use the manuscripts, the game always defaults to showing Alan's writer's room and just showing different camera angles from it. Like I understand the previous 2 Alan Wake games just showed you a piece of paper, but right at a piece of paper reading the words, as opposed to constantly showing me the same angles in the writer's room over and over and over, so the manuscripts take a while. I don't like the fact that manuscripts also important for the main plot, then they'll just have Alan's voiceover reading off and narrating it for the first time as you're playing, as opposed to needing to read it, go to the menu and everything, like everything else. And it's also a nice touch I do enjoy because it keeps things moving. Now when it comes to the dynamic between the 2 characters, I like Saga's story more and how she's dealing with the manuscript alternate reality and the stuff with the cult. But Alan in the Dark Place has more interesting visuals and stuff going on when it comes to a dark place and the whole supernatural aspect. Just the fact that because Alan's able to bounce off of, and because the dark presence isn't really being an outward threat with Mr. Scratch himself, considering kind of keeps emphasizing these are 2 things that are still going on, it just kind of feels like not really much happens with Alan's segments, even though they're still important to the story. So essentially Alan gets the lesser of the 2 segments when it comes to the 2 characters. That Alan gets more the supernatural aspects, which is cool, but Saga just has the more interesting narrative and plot going on and everything. So that's how I feel like shit. Like Alan is the weaker of the 2 when it comes to the 2 stories being told. Overall, I do enjoy the story of Alan Wake 2 and find it more gripping than any of the previous Alan Wake narratives that they've done. Like I said, Alan's story is the weaker of the 2 because it doesn't really have as much to bounce off of. It's either mostly him just monologuing to himself or just out of silence as he's trying to, you're playing the game to try to figure out puzzles and stuff. So I wish there was just more things that Alan had to interact with, while Saga has plenty of people in the real world to interact with, also her partner Alice Casey as well, so just plenty of people to interact with and bounce off ideas, even if the big main gameplay segments do have Saga by herself, but sometimes she has people she radios in as well. And because this game shares the same universe as Control, there is a lot of Control aspects you will notice in the narrative, whether it be the Federal Bureau of Control showing up, or characters who were mentioned in Control now being fully fleshed out characters within this game. You need to play Control first? Nope. But Control does help add more to the world, and one of the 2 DLC I'll talk about later is entirely Control themed as well. So you get more out of it if you did play Control, especially if you play the Alan Wake DLC in Control, since that it completely explains the fate of an Alan Wake character that honestly didn't need explaining, but I don't know, they did anyway. I also wish Barry was here. You get noticed to talk about what Barry's been doing, but you don't really get to ever see Barry or even have anything like a voiceover or radio or anything with Barry. I miss Barry. Where's my Barry? Now for the gameplay, with Alan Wake 2 going full survival horror with a third-person shooter setting, where you have limited resources and everything, and you have enemies that at points you may just want to avoid because the resources you're using on them may not be worth it. But when it comes to the main control skill gimmicks for Alan Wake 2, while they still remain here with the light aspect, they have been heavily toned down, where now in order to remove the dark shooting from a Taken, you need to press a dedicated button. I also don't like that because the button also is not just a hold button, it is a tap and the character will automatically shine a light for a certain amount of time. But this can also just fail because the Taken comes as being an angle where the game either won't remove the darkness from them at all, or it'll do it for a bit, but not fully. So it's just an inefficient way of doing it. On top of the fact that doing that also takes away a certain amount of the battery from the flashlight every single time. It's just a weird way of just taking the control away from the player, along with unnecessarily making a main mechanic for the gameplay just now something that is a dedicated button for no reason. You also have the issue that because of the game's visuals, which do look very pretty, it's also the fact that sometimes it can be hard to determine if an enemy still has the darkness coating, or if they don't, so you may end up using a flashlight on an enemy that was already vulnerable, or may try to shoot an enemy not knowing they still have the shooting on them, and there's gonna be several points where this game's pretty graphics pretty much betray it, such as, because this game's visuals are so jaw-dropping, the contrast between light and dark is so major that when you're playing as Alan Wake in the dark place, because everything's normally so dark, shining a flashlight on an enemy can be so bright that you may not even be able to see them from underneath the flashlight, which feels so backwards, but because the contrast between light and darkness, because the visuals are so good and beautiful, it actually betrays the game. This game's visuals are so good, it betrays the gameplay at points, which is something I didn't think I ever say, but they did it. Now, while you do scavenge for resources and a limited inventory, this game's loot system is dynamic, meaning the game only really gives you resources if it feels like you need it. So if you're carrying so many stuff on your person, you'll just find so many containers are just empty, and empty, because the game feels like you don't really need it. So if you just put stuff away in the shoebox, then the game will give you more stuff, because you'll think you have nothing. I don't like this dynamic, because I feel like it removes the entire survival aspect of the survival horror they're going for, if at all times, the game will just give you resources when it thinks you're low, meaning there's technically no reason not to just kill the Taken, except for the fact that they respawn, so kind of feel like wasted effort in that aspect. You do use resources on them. And speaking of the Taken, all the variety of the Taken you fought in American Nightmare are completely gone. We're back to way more basic enemy types, where some have physical items they get to go at you with, some may just use your fists, some may also just throw stuff at you. I still hate those guys. At one point, and only one point only, where there's some guys who use guns. I hated that. And when you're in the dark place, they will occasionally throw a projectile at you, but in my experience, you need to be very far away from them to even do it. So, rarely they'll do it in a dark place. They also just teleport towards Alan, so you may need to do it. And it can also grab you, which the game doesn't really tell you at first how to stop grabs. But there's also where flares come in, where flares can also be used to break grabs. If only the game told you a button, instead of just flashing a button very tinily, and then expecting you to see what it is as the characters are rapidly struggling. What the hell's going on with these people? But enemy variety is very low, to the point where I can confidently say, once you're basically 1 to 2 chapters into the game, like not very far, you've basically seen almost everything the game has to throw at you. And you're going to be repeating those enemies over and over, and they're not fun to fight, especially since because of the fact that the characters now take so much more damage or easier to kill, they only throw about a couple of the Taken at you at one time. Which is why there's one instance where they expect you to survive waves of Taken, which is a mistake because this game is not built for that, making an entire frustrating segment. And when you're playing as Alan in the dark place, it's easy to just avoid the Taken, because first, if it comes to Alan, they have to even notice he's even there. And while they do make voices going, Alan Wake, Alan Wake, that doesn't mean they actually know Alan is there yet. And there's even upgrades you can get for Alan that makes it even harder for him to detect. So it's easy as Alan to just run by enemies and just not care, because they either won't aggro often, or if they do, probably just be one guy you can easily take out. There's also the fact that Saga is the more combat person, where she has more optional weapons she can get. Alan only gets 3 weapons that are pretty much gifted to him, and his main weapon is a revolver, which does add more from a horror aspect because it takes longer to reload, but also highlights the fact that they don't really expect you to be doing combat as Alan much, with him having way more puzzle emphasis, with the main gimmick being the fact that while Saga has her mind place where she does detective work and profiling in order to find out more information on what's going on, and needing to line up the evidence on the case board gets very tedious and very boring really fast, Alan has his whole entire storyboard where he can find these echoes that will then give him inspiration on how to shift the narrative of the dark place, which does change certain places in the dark place in real time, which is a cool visual thing. I was gonna suck at one point, so not the best idea. But it does allow you to mold certain areas, which sounds cool, but like I said, it's only specific spots, so it's generally not that grand. So these are like cool ideas that they don't really do a whole lot with, since not much really changes with the dark place, only certain locales. Then you need certain story ideas in order to progress. Alan also has a lamp, which he can use to alter certain areas based on whether or not the light is on or off, to progress and everything. Which again, is a cool idea, but it's isolated to certain segments, so they can't really do a whole lot with it. Top of the fact that it carries charges, so there may be times that you activate it elsewhere, you may need to now go back to that place, deactivate it, take your charge back, in order to then go and progress forward in the story. Later on, they give you more charges, so that becomes a non-issue, but early on, I was wondering why I couldn't progress. The puzzles for Saga segments are ones that are just, they come up with an idea for a puzzle. Let's say, for one example, they do a puzzle that involves needing to place dolls on certain markers on the ground in order to solve a rhyme. It's a cool idea. And then they'll keep doing it over and over and over and over and over. And this is for a side puzzle. It's kind of a weird aspect when it comes to Saga's side. Well, they'll come up with a puzzle for a whole entire story segment Saga is doing, and then they'll just make you do that same puzzle over and over and over and over and over. Yes, the solutions are different, but it sort of becomes the idea that they don't really have much of an idea how to make different puzzles, while weirdly having so many. Because for Saga, you can keep finding resources from the cult, but the cult always locks their stuff around one of some puzzle types, with the in-game excuse being that the cult thinks solving puzzles and making them means you're smart. But since this game also has dynamic loot, that means the loot from the cult stashes may not even be worth it, because you may not get much, because if you have too much stuff on Saga's person, it may not even be worth the effort. With that point, I just stopped bothering. You also have some puzzles for Saga's side where you can use the case board in order to pretty much try and deduce aspects of the puzzle and make it simpler, but honestly the deductions Saga comes to basically boils down to the solution must be in the same room the puzzle's in. Something you'll quickly learn, that yes, the puzzle solutions are always in the same room than where the puzzle takes place, so it's not much of a deduction. And there are some puzzles that, honestly, I had no idea what they want me to do, and based on Googling it, some other people did it, some other people struggled to actually explain them. There's also some puzzles that rely on dates, and despite Alan Wake taking place in America, they still use the more, this one is a more European style of when it comes to writing dates. So, despite the fact it takes place in America, the characters do not write their dates for as style America, meaning the puzzles also reflect that. So keep that in mind on the different method of citing today's date when you do those puzzles as well, because you need to keep that in mind, because despite taking place in America, this game is still made in Finland, so they go with a different style. Saga also requires certain items that you need in order to progress through certain areas, with the main one the game teases you with being the bolt cutters, where for so much of the game they keep going, I need bolt cutters for it, I need bolt cutters for this, and eventually you do get it, but game, I ain't backtracking to those little couch because I got the bolt cutter, F you. No! especially since there'll just be more ammo that I really don't need. So that kind of thing. There is one point that frustrated me because I wasn't sure what to do, where I needed to open a locked door, but according to a note, Saga needed a screwdriver. So I went to a nearby workshop, where you inspect tools, no screwdriver, none. So I kept running around the entire locales because Saga's locales are rather big open areas, as opposed to Alan, who the dark place is one big open area, but the main places you go to are certain buildings, so it's more hallway based and more tighter spots, as opposed to Saga, who gets in more open areas. So I'm searching for a screwdriver, trying to look all over, and nothing. Eventually I do find it in a locale that I should have checked because it was actually nearby where I needed a screwdriver, only for Saga to use a screwdriver to just break the lock. Saga, we could have just shot the lock off. Why did you need a screwdriver to do the exact same thing?
Using screwdrivers to break into gift shops isn't exactly standard procedure.
There's also some areas that require bolt cutters that, Saga, it's like a, what, 6 foot tall chain link fence? Just climb over it, please! So there's some stuff that Saga has no reason to need tools to get through because she could just get through a different way, but for some remedies like, nope, you will solve it in the exact same way. Don't use logic, considering Saga does justify some stuff she does since she is FBI, so she needs to do certain things even if some of the things aren't exactly legal, like breaking and entering. There's also this weird quirk that, because the game's visuals and everything wants to be as realistic as possible, it also means that when you swap weapons, you need to wait for the character to actually realistically put the weapon away before swapping. For Alan, this isn't an issue considering he only has like 3 weapons, and 2 of them are very small weapons. The issue becomes for Saga, who can get an arsenal of weapons, and let's just say this, in most games, switching to a pistol when you need to reload is faster than reloading. In this game, that may not actually be the case, because there are points where it takes Saga a good while to put away the two-handed weapon and then pull out the pistol. And sometimes by that time, she could have probably reloaded at least 2 bullets into that two-handed weapon and at least fired them to actually get some distance. So there's that weird aspect that irked me, where sometimes it's faster to reload than to just switch to a different weapon. Overall, the gameplay is fine. It just feels toned down from Alan Wake 1, which already was just a more standard third-person shooter, but it's been more toned down where, well, revealing the darkness is now a dedicated button, which, okay, why do I need to hold a flashlight when shooting then, if the whole point of the original was the fact that aiming while doing that was also revealing them for the darkness. Stuff like flares also serve no purpose, or almost no purpose, because only in certain story segments will they flood you with Taken. Otherwise, flares just don't much of a point. I can use a flare on 1 or 2 Taken, like, at all, when you can reveal them normally, easily by themselves. Battery's never an issue since the whole entire dynamic loot system, the game will just give you more of what you need when you need it, so ammo's never an issue, so I've been talking about a horror game. There's never really a point where you're ever in a pinch or desperate for ammo or thinking, maybe I should sneak past the enemies instead of trying to fight. No, you can just blast everyone and call it a day, kind of thing. One of those weird aspects also means that stuff like these stun grenades, which only Alan gets for some reason, also a shell to form herself, where they do way less. On top of the flare gun for the first game that was super amazing and useful tool, is also a shell of his former self. Like, stuff that used to be so useful and amazing to use Alan Wake 1 are now just heavily toned down for Alan Wake 2 in order to try and, I guess, be more horror, but I don't know, aside from the visuals, the spectacle, it doesn't really do a whole lot different from the first game, unless you're playing as Alan in a dark place. There are jump scares that people have complained about, but you can't turn them off. People say you can turn them off. No. They made an update where you can reduce the jump scares, but they are still there because they're part of the narrative and highlighting the fact that the more they happen, the more dangerous situation you're in. It can be annoying since, well, jump scares are annoying and they aren't exactly scary. They're just spooky imagery, boo, kind of thing. But it's one of those things where you can't turn it off since it is part of the main story. Instead of Also, instead of having stun grenades, Saga gets propane tanks that I never use because you have to put them down and then fire at them to use them. And it's like, game, in what purpose do you think I have enough time to do that? Let alone when I actually think that'd be a good idea, or just use my bullets, you know? So gameplay just feels toned down, and he might have had some new ideas or some new types to take in, but they are introduced so late and used like maybe once or twice. They might as well not even have a point. So like I said early on, enemies you fought early on are basically all you're fighting throughout the game. Alan's segments, especially in Dark Place, are heavily way more spectacle based than any actual substance because of the fact that sure, these big cool moments that Alan gets, but like they don't really do much with the gameplay. And I know, and you know, one of the big lot of things is the Herald of Darkness segment. So then I even got a new rendition for the Game Awards in 2023 as well. So it's a very beloved moment, but you're not doing much gameplay wise. And if you don't do it exactly how developers intended, you may get frustrated just being stuck in this segment, which they do actually plan about because it actually loops pretty well when you're stuck. And there's a point in the song where Alan does mention how he's going to be stuck here as he figures out a way forward. So they do think about that aspect, which is a pretty cool on Remy's part. But this is a segment that, from what I've been told, apparently Sam Lake and Remedy wanted this segment into one of their games for a long time, with them even thinking Control could have had this, but it was rejected, with them finally doing it here, and the main reason being the cost of everything. I'm trying to do a segment like the Herald of Darkness, like considering this game's massive budget. Yeah, you can see why it'd be super expensive, why a publisher would usually say no! A post-release update added a new mode called the Final Draft, something that only unlocks after you beat the game. It's essentially the game's New Game Plus mode, but there are story differences and also a new ending to go with it. It's one of those things to wonder, is it worth going to the game again just for a new ending, since you don't have to and everything. But it's one of those things that, you know what, I'll get back to you on whether or not the Final Draft's actually worth it. This Me from the Future highlight the Final Draft is effectively the game's New Game Plus mode. You carry over your upgrades and your weapons, but you don't get to carry over any of the stuff like the case board being done or the key items. You just find them again when you're exploring. So it's purely only your combat stuff carries with you, which is combat's the weakest part of the game. Weird decision. As for the new story bits, it's only around like 10 to 15 minutes of new story content, so it is mostly just playing the game again. So you enjoy playing it again the first time, then you'll enjoy it again. You didn't enjoy playing it again the first time, well, there's the only way to get somewhat more closure, I won't say full proper closure, but it's still weird that there's added a post-game update as opposed to just being done in the main game itself, you know? But that's what it was a Final Draft. It's just a more unique incentive for a New Game Plus mode, you know? That's all it really had to be, so it gets the job done. You can also upgrade Saga and Wake, but how to upgrade them are different methods, and either form I don't really like. Like, Saga's upgrade method is needing to find these mysteriously placed lunchboxes that give her Manuscript pieces, which she can then spend on gun upgrades. I don't like this because they can just be in the most random places, and for the most part, I didn't find many of them. But the bigger issue is that Saga needs so many pieces just to get a single upgrade. It's ridiculous. As opposed to Alan, who needs to find words of power throughout the Dark Place, with different types of words of power giving different upgrades. But Alan needs way less words of power in order to upgrade himself, since he can get partial upgrades, while Saga can only get full upgrades, meaning it's easier to upgrade Alan, who doesn't need the upgrades since he's not going to do combat a whole lot, as opposed to Saga, who has more combat, so she would need the upgrades more, kind of thing. There's also this quirk that I hate comes to checkpoints, where when you die, the game makes you reclaim the collectible again. So there are points where I died so many times as Alan, I had to go back, go to rewards of power I found and pick it up every single time and make sure not to forget, kind of thing. Also, early on when I first played the game, I ventured around at Saga trying to look for stuff on several lunchboxes, only for the game to not save any of it because the game's checkpoint system is wonky. There is a manual save system, but you can only manually save within these safe houses, and you don't get your first safe house until you're like an hour and a half to 2 hours into the game, which is so ridiculous. They wait that long to give me the ability to save the game, and usually instead of having to rely on the may not even work checkpointing system. This game is also buggy. It's had one instance where the game just started slowing down and lagging super hard for some reason. Just slowed down, started running poorly. And it was a game itself, as shows in the footage, so that happened. I had one bug in one of the DLCs, I'll talk about later, where the game just froze and soft locked. So that wasn't fun. And there was one segment in which Saga just fell to the ground and started falling to the abyss. It could use more polish. Also the fact that these subtitles could use more polish, because sometimes subtitles can be wrong or just have typos. And several typos, especially. They needed someone to do some grammar check and put some extra spaces, remove some spaces, stuff like that when it comes to subtitles. As we're talking about text, well, let's get this part out of the way. You can increase the size of the subtitles, which is fantastic. A large option is a really large option, and I do greatly appreciate that. That's super cool. The issue then comes with the rest of the game's text, especially for collectibles. You see, in most games, you get a collectible, especially when that's higher detailed environment, you will generally have a second version that is then meant for the player to read. One to see in the environment show off your graphics, and then one for the player to actually read. And while they do that here, the one meant for the player to read is still so small because it's just plastered next to the asset as opposed to being a full screen thing for the player to look at. It just makes trying to read those things super difficult, on top of the fact that the game does not pause while you're doing this. So there are enemies nearby, they'll come attack you. They take you for the map. If you read the map, enemies nearby, they will attack you and interrupt you. So you're not safe during these segments, so to not have them be more readable is just baffling when you already made the effort, made the subtitles way more readable. So I appreciate subtitles, everything else is so small, especially in the freaking case board where there are little notes, all the evidence that Saga's writing that just, for some reason, they just make tiny because they want to put it on the asset itself. That's one of those things that's like, can we not? Can we make those readable too, please? But now we got DLC. And the DLC is packaged with the physical release that Alan Wake 2 eventually got down the line and everything. By the way, the first bit of DLC is Night Spring episodes. What are these 3 little short episodes of Night Springs that you can fully play through, with them each having their own gimmick. The first one being playing as Rose from the first Alan Wake, where she's been tasked to save Alan Wake from a kidnapper. It is very goofy and, you know, entertaining. Second one is instead playing this Night Springs version of Control, where he even got back the same actions, everything, to reprise her role as Jessie, but just not as Jessie herself, instead being called the sibling, according to the Night Springs episode. But it's essentially just a goofier version of Control that's way more puzzle-based. I can't even say puzzle, I'll say exploration-based, as opposed to the first episodes were combat-based. Then the last one being one about an actor who now has to deal with a multiverse, and this one, you can tell they're trying to set up for something more down the line with new projects. But this one more about multiverse. I believe they do get back the actor who played the main character of Quantum Break. Even this one, he's decided to play as an actor, and it's not a time-based Night Spring episode, it says multiverse aspect, and this one's way more puzzle-based, with there being a puzzle that I had to look up, and other people agreed, there was no way in hell you're figure out that solution, because the game didn't really properly tell you what to even give you a clue what you're supposed to be doing. But next week episodes they're fine, they're alright. Like I said, one's combat based, one's exploration based, and one is puzzle based. And they're all serviceable, with the main one being the third episode, because it feels like they're gonna do more with that scenario and everything. So that's all I can say about Night Springs DLC. It's just, it exists. But interesting part of DLC is the fact that you can do them during the main story, so the game will prompt you to do it since they're baked into the main story aspects, or you can do it later from the main menu. The second DLC is the Lakehouse, with this one once again prompted to do in the main story where it's relevant, with this one being a prequel story about a lake house nearby that is actually part of a locale that Saga can't actually go into and is told to have clearance for since it's part of the FBC, with this DLC being way more about control and the FBC before the events of Alan Wake 2 and everything. This DLC does way more supernatural aspects where the room locales can swap, or you can make them swap, and just try to figure out what's going on in the lake house, why people are suddenly gone and are dead. And there's also a new enemy type that are invincible to all damage types except for one. And thankfully don't use a chaser enemy, instead only occupy certain areas, but is the new threat the fact that you need a certain weapon, which you'll get later on, in order to actually kill it. Although I wish these things they turn invisible, but that's not the point. This one also being way more puzzle based, even on points where there are segments where they do flood lots of enemies at you, but it's one of the few times where the flares actually have a purpose. Hallelujah, they found a purpose for their nerf flares. So this one is actually pretty good. I like how they managed to keep the horror aspect and everything, on top of the fact they felt they do more supernatural aspect control by having the room shift everything, so once you're to the room, it will not be the same as when you try to exit, trying to figure out how your new escape plan and everything. There's also the reason to backtrack, because there are rooms you can't unlock until later without certain key cards. And the puzzles, like I said, because of Saga's kind of puzzles, they are repeated kind of puzzle types. Although later on the DLC kind of just gives up and just puts a post-it note next to computers what their password is. So they do know when to go, okay, we're just gonna give you the answer and get you moving on as the DLC gets closer and closer to wrapping up. But as a self-contained little story that's more focused on the FBC, it is an enjoyable little story. I do like the stuff to do going on, and the gameplay that's trying to switch things up are good, so I do like the Lakehouse DLC. Overall, I do enjoy Alan Wake 2, but I said Alan Wake 1 felt more like a TV show than it did a video game. This one absolutely is a TV show more than a video game. It's also why the Hunter aspect of the final draft, being a plus New Game Plus or more story, baffled me, because your gameplay, you're not focusing on the gameplay at all. So somebody to play the game again before this is one of those, you got a lot of nerve. But it's also an interesting way of doing New Game Plus mode, where they do add more story and stuff, try to fill more things in, as opposed to the main game where some things could have had better answers or as a general. So it isn't just a unique way of doing a New Game Plus mode, which I do find interesting. But when your gameplay is exactly up to snuff, asking a player to do it again is one of those, like I said, you got a lot of nerve. I do like the new character Saga, I like her more than Alan, but I just wish that Alan had more to do and interact with the Dark Place, considering the fact that, despite the game being called Alan Wake 2, he feels like the lesser of the two overall. I talked to the streamer I talked to who felt like Alan should have not been in this game at all, and instead reserved for a different title, because that's how much they felt like Alan's segments dragged on the game for them. I won't say Alan's dragged on the game, because it's more puzzle supernatural aspect, which the game really needs, because you don't get enough of that with Saga, but Saga's adventure is the more interesting one. You can swap between the two characters, but you only do so at certain locales, very specific locales. And there are points when a game will try to nudge you to start playing another character, because once you finish one character's story, you're left with the other character's story until you get to the finale and everything. So you could try to space out the swapping, or just do one character's story fully, and the other character's story fully, and then immediately after, you know? So they don't give you the option. But like I said, especially when it comes to Alan Simmons' A Dark Place, it's way more trying to be visual and all of you. Like, just the visuals of The Dark Place, being in the night, in the rain, in New York, just looks beautiful. The Herald of Darkness segment is nothing but pure spectacle, because there sure ain't much going on there gameplay-wise. It's just one of those things that highlights, you put more focus on the visuals, put more focus on this and this and this, than actually being a game. That's why I say this is way more of a TV show than the first game was. I'm talking about toning down mechanics from the first game. Like, I get it, you want to have a musical sequence for a long time, and it's basically a dream come true being able to add into Alan Wake 2. It also highlights where your priorities are, and it's not in being a game, you know? Like, I'm not trying to insult Ramen Entertainment at all. Like, the sequence is entertaining, but gameplay-wise, it's like, I'm not doing much here, I'm just watching things happen, you know? So I would have preferred if the musical sequence had more gameplay too. I do know, like a friend told me that apparently pay attention, try to nudge the player and point them to the right direction. It failed on me hilariously, I didn't know where to go. So when I said it's one of those things where when you know what the developers want you to do, it could be a very cool segment. If you don't, it becomes a, hello, I'm stuck here, please let me out kind of thing. So overall, the gameplay got weaker in the first game, but the story is more up there, although granted, Alan's segments, he could have used more people to interact with. I know he's in a dark place, so he can't, but he needed someone to bounce off of. Alan by himself just isn't the most interesting person. That's why, like in the first game, where he had someone like Barry to bounce off ideas with, but here he doesn't, so that's why Saga's more interesting. She has more people to bounce off her ideas with everything, while Alan occasionally has some people to talk to, but only for some circumstances. So, I wish I did more with that. Either way, like, I still say it's a good game, you know? That's all I gotta say about Alan Wake 2. Alrighty then, good day.